Well, hello everyone! It's Miss Willow, and today I am here to share another fantasy story of mine. Here it goes. The evening was cool and the sky was darkened. Willow took a stroll through the woods, through the pines, and through the other tall trees, until she reached the home of the great Lord Hemlock. One thing she came here for was something that's been on her mind ever since she's met a dragon. Something not many others, in fact. She doesn't even think she's heard of anybody in her world who has tried it, other than in stories, true or fabled. She has never ridden a dragon. There was no other dragons in her world, yet that she's known so much more than Hemlock. Augustine, sure, but he was a very different kind of dragon. When he flies, it is just for himself. He is a king, and not a means of transportation. She definitely hoped the same possible unwelcoming disagreements towards flying with Hemlock would not come from him. She does not want to fly a dragon and make the dragon feel as though it's a tool, a plane, or a vehicle. She wants to ever fly a dragon as friends, adventuring together. So she worried herself a bit. Why a princess to wander into the pine forests this evening just to seek this adventure? She has encountered and spoke with Hemlock many times in the past. When she first met him, he was a mighty beast, protecting the land's forests and keeping peace among the woods. He spoke deeply and seriously to her, but did not dare to ever want to greet her as other dragons from tales and legends would. Vicious creatures hoarding treasure, gold, and loot, and having any and every adventurer that crosses their paths for supper. That's like the stories that Willow has read, but not Hemlock, and frankly not many of the others she's met. He requested she doesn't bring an axe into his forest, at least that one, as he feared a newcomer would chop down his trees. Sure, there were others who snarled and growled and crept close with their mighty jaws and foot-long teeth, but Hemlock was a dragon keeping his snarls and growls and foot-long teeth safely inside his jaws, never bearing them at anyone he didn't need to. Over time, Hemlock was considered a friend to Willow, coming to see her and her journal when she wrote in it, sharing wonders from the forest and her wonders of the kingdom she lived with each other. Hemlock spoke less seriously and deeply with her as he did earlier on. He did not feel like he had to put up any guard with the princess, as he trusted her and she trusted him. Even considering Hemlock was an enormous dragon, she trusted him and never felt the need to turn around and look for wherever Hemlock might be at. Of course, even the few times she turned around to find him standing there, once she knew it was him, she was even relieved that it was, instead of any other dragon. He was a friend to her, a gentle and polite dragon in both words and demeanor. Now, back to the present. Willow walked down the path until she reached the thick plates of bark on the tall trees of his forest. There were some prickly vines and some very nasty clawed plants at her feet, so she tried carefully to tread through the growth of the forest so that she could get to the clearing. She could hear an owl hooting deeply and hollowly from somewhere out of sight. It was the coming of nighttime, and the moon rose high above the lands. She stepped into the clearing with a glowing jewel in her hands to see a boulder, one that she has been to before, where she saw Hemlock. She walked around the boulder laying on the ground and peeked behind it. There, curled up with only giant horns peeking out of the bundle in the middle of the clearing, was none other than Hemlock. Willow smiled and ran up to him. As she got close, she could see his huge eyes shut and his nostrils flaring slowly, as the mighty Lord Hemlock dragon breathed. She reached out and put a hand on the giant plates of scales on his claw. "Hemlock, it's me, Willow. Are you there?" she said to him. Hemlock must have smelled her, as dragons in the world have very keen senses of smell. They could smell even a single squirrel from a mile away, it seemed, because his nostrils started flaring faster and he opened his eyes. The film on his eyelids rose up, revealing a deep golden iris as he looked at her. He rose his head from the bed of pine needles and spoke. "Willow, what brings you here, my friend? Something bothering you back at the tower?" Willow shook her head. "No, Hemlock, I came to see you, because there's something I was curious of, and completely understand if you don't want to go on this adventure." He repositioned himself more comfortably to face her, and he bent his head down to listen to her, whatever story she wanted to share. Willow spoke. I have met many dragons, but I don't trust any of them as much as you. You're my friend, she said. Hemlock smiled. I'm glad you think of me that way. I've never had a human friend quite as much as you either, he said. Willow continued. Well, I've heard of legends of people flying dragons high in the sky, seeking adventure together, or war, or anything really, but I don't know if that's true. Since I was little, I've always wondered what it's like to have a dragon as your friend and take to the skies. Willow looked to the side, hoping that the hidden request of hers didn't seem at all belittling towards Hemlock. She was so scared that if she asked him to take her flying, that it would seem like a chore to him, or seem like those knights who ride on the horses because they need to get somewhere, or she didn't want to make Hemlock feel like a new means of travel. Hemlock laughed. Willow, of course, those stories could be true, but I don't think I've seen people riding dragons before myself. I've seen that behavior from creatures like the tamed griffins from the stables or Pegasi, but not dragons. He stared at her. Willow lost hope. Oh, so you wouldn't let me then. That's okay. Sorry I disturbed your rest, Hemlock. I'll be on my way. Willow turns to leave, trying to hide the tear in her eye. She really thought that this dragon was friendly enough and willing enough to let her experience one of her childhood wishes, to fly on a dragon. Just as she turned, Hemlock replied, I didn't say we couldn't be the first dragon in person to fly that I've ever seen, did I? He spoke. Willow's face lit up. Hemlock gestured to his back, and Willow ran forward towards him. He leaned his wings to one side, allowing Willow to reach up and climb onto his back. As she did, she held onto his scales tightly, scared. Hemlock spoke. I've never driven anyone before, but I will be careful not to drop you. Hold on tight, he said. Willow gulped, but was more than ready to fly a dragon. He spread his ginormous wings and took a rapid leap into the sky. Willow tugged at the scales and fur on the back of Hemlock's neck, holding on as the wind pushed her back. Whoa! Careful! I'm falling! She called out and hugged the dragon even tighter. Hemlock looked back, and once he exited the forest trees, he slowed his wings, and the flight became much smoother. Willow held on, her feet no longer grounded on any sort of land. It felt terrifying to her for the first moment until she remembered that Hemlock was a very trustworthy dragon, and was probably centuries old. He knew how to fly, that was not in question. She looked up and was finally able to admire the cold air of the sky. She still held on tight, as almost anyone she knew would, but as she breathed heavily, she eventually caught her breath and was able to calm herself once again. She sat up and watched as trees, not just trees, forests passed by below her, the wings of Hemlock flapping up and down every couple of seconds to catch the wind again and stay in the sky. She called out, Hemlock, this is what you get to see whenever you want? It's amazing, she said. Hemlock turned his head back to see her. The biggest smile on Willow's face made him smile happily too. I do get to see this every day, though my nature keeps me in my forest most of the time. I can fly any time if you wish, my friend, just ask, he said. Willow squealed with excitement and watched the stars fly by. The land had moved so fast beneath them as they flew in the clouds that she no longer could see where they had come from. Hemlock turned around and went back to the forest which was his home. Willow hopped off the dragon's back, and when her legs and feet were on solid land again, they wobbled a bit. She had to rethink how to walk again, it seemed. She laughed. Oh my goodness! Hemlock, thank you so much. You are truly my favorite dragon. Hemlock and Willow said farewells and parted ways. Willow ran back to her tower to tell her partner the news and adventure she had gone on with Hemlock the dragon. The night fell darker and colder, and Willow longed for a good, cozy rest. The end.